Good afternoon. My name is Honor Feedy, and I'm with NAESP, and you've joined us for this afternoon's webinar session on creating physical and emotional security in schools. We're so pleased to be offering a series of webinars with Solution Tree, and this is the first of that series. This afternoon, we're pleased to have Ken Williams join us. He is a former teacher, assistant principal, and principal, and he has firsthand experience with transforming challenging schools, and has a very inspiring message that brings you hope as far as changing your school and overcoming these challenges. Ken, we are just so happy to be working with you on this series, and I hope that everyone, you have a good time today. With that, I'll turn it over.
Great. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to today's session. I want to thank you for organizing it. As Honor mentioned, I'm a former teacher, assistant principal, and school principal. I led 2 schools in 2 different districts through the process of improvement. And one school was nestled in a working-class suburban area right outside of Washington, D.C. And my second school, which was probably the greater impetus for this work, was right outside Atlanta, Georgia. It was 95% free reduced lunch, 95% poverty, 6 years of cycle failure, and I was hired 8 days before students returned. And so this issue of physical and emotional security was in my face all the time. And so I'm looking forward to sharing just a few nuggets regarding this work. I wanted to start with a quick quote, 19th century quote by Samuel Johnson. And he tells us, people more frequently require to be reminded than informed. People more frequently require to be reminded than informed. And rather than go into a lengthy explanation of this quote, I found a clip from Educational Performance Troupe Wavelength, and I think this teacher expresses this quote better than anyone else. Take a listen.
Now, Donnie, just remember, anxiety about change is really just a fear of losing control.
But Dr. Bond, that's just it. I have no control. None. Not an ounce of it. I've been in elementary education for 23 years, and I've seen open classrooms and back to basics, whole language, hooked on phonics, higher standards, no standards. You do your thing, guys. Don't do that thing. Assertive discipline, no discipline, student-based education, outcome-based education, mastery learning, master teachers, merit grade, mentoring programs, peer coaching. I've done it all.
I would just love to know your thoughts when I see that video. I think to myself, I like to set up this point. There are very few new ideas in education. You know this. It's about execution and putting things into practice. And so the information I share in this webinar today, it's going to do one of 2 things. It's going to validate the great work you're already doing, or it's going to shine a light and be a reminder of a few nuggets, a few things that if we tweak as part of our program can enhance physical and emotional security for kids. That's the bottom line. There's so much being thrown at us constantly that we often need reminders of those small things that are important. And that's what my book is about, and that's what this webinar is about. All about safety for kids. Now, this was a great awakening for me, and it served me ever since I left the principalship and have traveled the country, both nationally and internationally, helping schools create better physical and emotional security, and that is this. At my second school in Atlanta, that was 95% free reduced lunch, 95% poverty, and many of our kids came from shattered backgrounds. What we realized very quickly, this big wake-up call, was that for most of our students, the adults in the building, the adults at the school, were some of the most stable adults in their lives, and the school represented one of the most stable places in their lives. And what that did for us is that it created more urgency than we already had about our calling into education. And it absolutely brought to bear the huge burden we had to create this environment, regardless of what was going on in our own lives, to create an environment for kids that made them feel accepted, safe, welcome, and supported. And so we saw this huge burden. We knew a lot of our kids, again, encountered some of the most stable adults in their lives at our school. And listen, we had our own levels of dysfunction as a staff, so it added extra pressure on us. For a lot of our kids, they got 2 of their hopeful 3 meals a day at our school. And so this business of physical and emotional security was critically important. We saw it as a tongue and groove. You know, if you think about the flooring in your home, if you've got hardwood flooring or pergo flooring, or you've been anywhere with hardwood flooring, those are flat slats that are individual and joined together with a joint that makes it seem contiguous. And that joint is called a tongue and groove. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't walk around my home and think about the tongue and groove flooring beneath my feet and how sturdy it is and how well crafted it is. It never crosses my mind, but I understand the importance of a secure foundation. And that's what physical and emotional security is for our kids, for our schools. It's often those intangibles that don't show up on the school improvement plan or the accountability report, but had better be in place if we want to lay the foundation for high levels of learning. And so we look at physical and emotional security as that tongue and groove foundation that we use to set the table for high levels of academic learning for our kids. That's exactly what it does. But you know, it all starts out with Einstein. I believe Einstein had a wonderful quote that I love to refer to. And before I get to that, I just want to share this, the first line of Chapter 2 of Simplifying RTI in 4 Easy Steps. Maddles remarks, a successful journey does not begin with taking a first step, but with facing the right direction. Facing the right direction. And this work of physical and emotional security falls under that. Now the challenge for us is, this is what many educators and theorists call soft data. It's not the kind of hard data that those with whom we stand in judgment decide whether or not our school is effective. But we know that it's an integral part of our schools being effective. As Einstein reminds us, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And so these are those areas that we've got to be really careful in this age of crushing accountability, where kids are relegated often to a test score, a dot on a blip on a screen, where it's all about tangible assessments, paper and pencil tests, these very tangible measures of performance, that we don't lose sight of those critical performance areas that don't have formal measurement. Physical and emotional security don't have formal measures, but we've got to be we've got to be cognizant of its presence at our schools. Here are the 4 things that kids have to feel when they walk in. Students have to feel 4 things. They've got to feel welcomed, supported, accepted, and safe. Again, no lightning bolts with this data, but it's what Marzano found in terms of figuring out what it took for students to be engaged when they walked in. Welcome, supported, accepted, and safe. And when I go back and refer to those students that we served in Atlanta, many of whom came from very challenging backgrounds, this was of heightened importance for us, that they feel welcome, supported, accepted, and safe. But in working with schools, from schools that are deeply impoverished to those that are extremely affluent, these 4 characteristics of strong emotional and physical safety apply to any student, whether they come from secure backgrounds or not. We should make no assumptions. We should make it a huge burden for us to create the environment where kids feel this way, when they walk in and feel like they're welcome, supported, accepted, and safe. And it's got to be more than a checklist. It can't simply be a checklist. We've got to be intentional about it. So what I'd like to do at this moment is make this webinar a bit interactive. If you're familiar with my work, if I've been to your school, you know that the sit and get format, where I talk at you the entire time, is not typically how I do things. And so I want to engage you in an interactive poll. But if you would follow me to this poll, ask the simple question, anonymous feedback. The statement is this: every student feels welcomed, supported, accepted, and safe. And my question to you is this: at your school or at your site, is this statement strategic and intentional? Which means we have a system, we have a plan in place to ensure that every student feels welcome, supported, accepted, and safe. Or are we at the stage where we're wishful and hopeful? We take a look at our data. That's great. That's great. So we've got some folks who are intentional about it, and we've got some that are hopeful. I mean, considering the numbers, that's pretty good data. I would love to hear from the folks who are intentional. I would love to get some feedback.
Ken, why don't we ask respondents, for those of you that polled in under intent, if you wouldn't mind chatting about, using the chat box and chat in some of the things you're doing, and I'll read them to you.
Absolutely makes sense, and no idea is too small, nothing's too simple. Just want to know what you do to be intentional about students feeling welcome and supported when they walk in.
Okay, so I've got one right now. Kim writes, we have people strategically placed throughout our campus that check in with students on a regular basis, AM and PM.
Awesome. And see, what I love about that is, you hear something like that, and many of us will say, well, that happens to me on a daily basis. But at most schools, when it's not intentional and strategic, what you have are pockets of these kinds of strategies. Whereas in one part of the building, Kim and some of her teammates may be in one part of the building checking in with students, but if it's not a school-wide strategic and intentional plan, you'll have another part of the building where people aren't as aware and implementing the same strategies. So even something as simple as checking in with students, I mean, it means a ton and gives us a chance to really touch base with them and make them feel a part and welcome.
We have another comment from Kim that says, we explain the purpose behind safety procedures and involve parents and visit homes. Eric writes, they do PBIS, advisement, mentoring, safety drills, interventions, and calling all students by name.
That's a big deal. Those are big deals. I mean, those are, small moves that add up to huge results. Small moves that add up to huge results. I mean, PBIS, you're looking at a systematic way to bring consistency for behavioral expectations with positive reinforcement. Something as simple as calling students by name. Outside of thank you, the two words that people love to hear most, studies show, are their first and last name. And so it's just really important. It just personalizes everything. And it makes it more than a checklist when we can explain it and get involved with students' lives. So we just conducted this poll, and hopefully you'll be able to take that tool and move it forward. And I would bet that, we don't have the kind of time today to explore this, but I would bet that people like Eric and Kim and the rest of you on this call are really clear on your school's compelling why. The word why drives everything we do. And I often ask the question, when you come to school, do you feel like you're a part of something larger than yourself? You don't have to be in love with everyone you work with, but you look to your right and your left and know that the people with whom you work are all after the same thing. Have those things been defined? Our critical cultural beliefs, have we defined them? The 2 or 3 things that we decide are going to be our non-negotiables for our students. And what I find in my work is that I come across scores and scores of excellent educators, from teachers all the way down to school administrators and everyone in between. But often they have competing priorities and are not absolutely clear on their school's compelling why, those agreed upon cultural beliefs that come out of a discussion and dialogue about what's most important about our school. And without that discussion, we don't have clear and compelling direction, which drives initiatives and strategies like the ones that have been mentioned so far. Your school's compelling why is your North Star. It's the school's North Star.
We have 2 more really interesting comments. Renee writes, adults greet each student as they get off the bus and enter the building. Guidance counselors conduct class meetings and small group interventions. And then Rosa writes, we connect students who need additional support with, quote, pals. checking in planned activities with adults.
That's fantastic. It's great stuff. I appreciate you guys checking in. I mean, those are great moves, great moves. Again, and when done systemically, you have a much better chance of catching all kids. More times than not, I see those things happening in pockets at schools that I visit. And our goal is for these kinds of strategies to be taken on school-wide with intention. And it's important that people understand why we're doing it. It can't be simply a checklist, and it can't be simply done out of compliance. It's got to be done because there's a driving belief. There's a driving belief that we use as the prism for all of our decisions and all of our strategies. Otherwise, what you have are well-intentioned people moving in different directions, competing priorities. And so it looks like you've already answered a couple of my questions that I had next. My next question was, has your school or site gotten really clear on the 1 or 2 non-negotiables regarding kids, regarding physical and emotional security in schools? Have you defined 2 beliefs? And 2 is not necessarily a magic number. It can be 1 or 2 compelling beliefs that drive everything you do, that become the prism through which all decisions are made regarding physical and emotional security with kids. I'll share a couple that we had at our site, and would love for folks to check in and share others as well. We had 2 regarding our kids, and this was at both schools. At our school in Atlanta, when we saw how so many of our kids got off to rough starts in their morning, we made it a cultural belief that every child needs to know that someone is happy they came to school today. And we didn't, right? So I want you to just take that in. And we wanted every student when they walked in, we wanted them to know that someone was glad to see them in school that day. And so the next question becomes, how do you take that from being a nice slogan on a poster or a T-shirt and really, actualize it? And our school did something similar to what Eric and Kim and Rosa and others have shared. And that is simply this. At our school, it started off with a question. I passed out class rolls to every teacher and asked them to identify our students who were both behaviorally and academically challenged. And they highlighted all these names. And then I asked the question, for our students, research shows that when students who come up in challenging environments graduate high school, they often refer back and they're asked, why were you successful in graduating high school and moving on to college? And their answer is often they refer to an adult who took an interest in them. Not necessarily the best teacher, not necessarily the favorite teacher, not necessarily a teacher, but an adult who took an interest in them. And then I asked the question, are we willing to intentionally touch base and make sure that these kids feel that someone is happy that they came to school today? And one of our staff members challenged us to not only look at the kids who are academically and behaviorally challenged, but to make this a goal for every student. And so we started pairing students with adults in waves, every adult. And we asked those adults, we call them our adult encouragers, to touch base with students 2 or 3 times a week. No gifts, just the gift of time. No physical gifts. Just if you see the student in the hallway, stop by, squat down at a desk next to them, and it just began to slowly change the entire culture of our school. It started out as a really strange phenomenon because we didn't round the students up and say, you are in need, and now we're going to pair you up with people who care about you. What we did was we briefly trained our adults. We got clear on some expectations, and then we went about the business of touching base with students 2 or 3 times a week. Every adult had 2 or 3 students. Didn't take a lot of time. It was just about intention. And while the first few days felt kind of strange and kids gave us strange looks, after about 3 days, can you imagine, those students were looking for that adult encouragement. That student can see the adult from a distance and know that when that adult walks up to that line, they're going to stop and pull that student out of line, or stop by that student's desk and touch base with them and just ask how things are going and what they're doing and how they can be supported. And it made a huge difference. Now, our school was so impacted that I needed more than instructional staff to pull this off, and so we recruited everyone. We got our food services and kitchen staff involved. I mean, Miss Earlene would greet kids as they came through the line, and she's putting food on their trays. She would greet her students then. We got our building services staff involved. You know, I tease sometimes and say that if the UPS driver took too long to get a signature at our school, he or she would also have students with whom they encouraged as well. And it just over time began to really change the culture of our school and just created this environment where we felt like every student was our student. It just made a huge difference. So that was the first thing. Every child needs to feel that every child needs to know that someone is happy they came to school today. And then academically, we provide soft floors and high ceilings for every student. We provide academic press. The impetus for this was I just had a problem with the fact that students who were quote-unquote seen as gifted got a different type of education. It seemed like every time I walked into those classrooms, the curriculum was focused on their strengths. And when I walked into classrooms where students were struggling, the curriculum given to teachers often focused on students' weaknesses. And I wanted to kind of flip that and find out what happens if we give all kids an opportunity to access high levels of education and higher order thinking. And it too created awesome social emotional results in our students. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask for some of your feedback. I would love questions and some of the things that you do as well. If you've got a couple of core beliefs that kind of would serve as a North Star for your school, I would love to hear those. Now, if your school hasn't defined those things yet, you know, the great thing about this work is that you can begin to change that tomorrow. You go back and we ask the question, you know, what do we want to ensure for every student? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? I think there are enough encouraging posters and phrases and T-shirts and mission statements and slogans all over schools that we can look and decide, you know what, that's going to be our mantra. That's going to be our North Star. And then more importantly, how do we actualize it?
Kim writes, work together, win together.
Ooh, I like that.
Rosa writes, core beliefs, our school is a safe haven for our students and community. We have systems in place. Eric writes, pride with a capital P-R-I-D, which stands for personal responsibility and daily effort. That's a good one. Rosa says, we create events that encourage, empower, and support the whole family, academically, emotionally for students and families. That's a great one. Zach writes, North Star, we have to help every student believe that they are valuable, desirable, lovable, and acceptable before we get to education.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so here are a couple of things that I would say about that. That's fantastic. One of the questions is, you know, how do we check in? How often do we monitor and check in? Often this kind of great work takes place at the beginning of the school year, and you know it gets shared and shelved. And so I don't know that the time allows today, but I would love to continue a dialogue, perhaps on Twitter, if not here, where we talk about how do we continue that kind of dialogue. How do we continue that, you know, on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis? How do we keep those kinds of questions in the middle of the table? One of the things that I encourage is that leaders provide what's called, O'Connor calls focused feedback. And that feedback is directly aligned with those agreed upon cultural beliefs. And so once we identify those beliefs and we define how we actualize those beliefs, then leaders and then peers alike have to provide each other feedback on what we're doing to move toward actualizing those beliefs and what we can do to get better at actualizing those beliefs. Those are fantastic, and thank you for sharing. Intention follows investment. That's my deep belief, that intention follows investment. And so once we invest in these critical cultural beliefs, shared investment, then we have sincere intention. Without investment, without a discussion of collective commitments, without everyone being involved in what we're trying to become as a school, the best we can hope for is compliance. And compliance won't do when it comes to physical and emotional security. It won't do in terms of providing emotional and physical security in schools is critically important. And so with that in mind, we want to move past slogans. You know, we've got to move past slogans. They've got to be intentional, and that's a lot of what's being shared from teammates on this call. It's got to be systematic. It's not enough for these things to happen in pockets. You know, when strategies like the ones that are being shared happen in pockets, what it creates are pockets of excellence. It's the educational lottery. You know, if students are on, you know, situated on one hallway or on one team, they're going to be guaranteed strong physical and emotional security. If they're on another hallway or another team, they may not have that same guarantee. And that is often because their North Star hasn't been defined, agreed upon, and we don't hold each other accountable to moving in that direction. We've got to be overt about things, absolutely overt. You know, again, our little program, it wasn't perfect, but I'm telling you, it changed the culture at our school because we were overt about it. I mean, every adult was assigned 2 or 3 students. We were serious about it. You know, we tried to expand it and make sure that every student was included in the process, not just the students who identified as those who struggled. And it really did seek to change the culture of our school. In fact, I had, I think the highlight of doing that for a couple of years at our school was if I was assigned a 3rd grader, Jalavia, little 3rd grader, and I would touch base with her often and see how she was doing. I'd stop by the class. I'd see her at recess or at lunchtime. Well, I guess 8 or 9 months into the school year, there was an afternoon where there were several adults outside my door, outside, you know, the principal's office, and you know, it's almost like take a number. There, you know, everyone's in line and needed something and waiting to see me. And I see this little girl kind of squeezing between adults and kind of popping into my office, and it was Jalavia. And I asked her what she was doing here. She said, "I just came to check on you." I thought it was the sweetest thing. And so I asked her if her teacher knew she was out there of the classroom, and of course she said no. Teacher doesn't know I'm out of the classroom. But she stopped in to check on me, which I thought was just a huge deal. It just meant that those intentions of that deliberate culture was just kind of permeating and becoming part of just what we did. And I am proud to say that our initiative went from a very structured program to just something that we did, which is what culture is, just the way we do things around here. And it's got to be actionable. To move past our slogans, we've got to be intentional about it, systematic, overt, and it's got to be actionable. We've got to take action. And again, this is one of those areas that if we're not careful, it will get short shrift because it doesn't show up on the standardized assessment in overt ways. But we've got to be really clear about it. One other important point, and one of our teammates talked about making sure that these things are in place before we get to the academics. I want to be clear that physical and emotional security is all done in the service of academic press, of helping kids become phenomenal learners, ensuring that they all learn at high levels, creating opportunities for them to get in touch with and access their passion, not misplaced sympathy. And I find that often students, especially students who come from tough backgrounds, often get caught in the snare of misplaced sympathy. And that's where, with love in our hearts and with the greatest of intentions, we work on their social, emotional health in the service of shielding them from further struggles, if you know what I'm saying. It's poor babies, they come from tough backgrounds. We don't want to push them too hard, so we love on them and we don't apply rigor. We don't help students access their passions. We don't engage them in higher order thinking. And we got to be careful about that all of this is done in the service of moving our kids to high levels of learning. And we know that's a definition of a caring learning community, that we care for them, we build relationships, and we help them access all they can. We expose them to as much as we can. And so we've got to be careful with that misplaced sympathy. We're doing kids no favors, even kids who come from really tough backgrounds, when we shield them from the rigors of life. We have an obligation obligation that once we connect with kids, that we use that relationship to pull them aggressively toward their goals. That's often the elephant in the room. When I work with students and I work with teachers and schools and leadership in places where we're still talking about these huge achievement gaps, or where perhaps kids who are struggling socioeconomically aren't achieving as much, where perhaps kids of color aren't achieving as much. And so one of the things that we have to often face and own up to is, are we keeping expectations as high for those students as we do everyone else? Are we working toward kids' strengths? Are we working from a strengths model? And I know that lots of curricula out there is targeted to work from a deficit model, where we're looking and trying to help kids with their weaknesses as opposed to enhancing their strengths. So that's just something to stay very aware of, this idea of misplaced sympathy. We want to do this in the service of academic press, which is about learning for all.
Rosa writes in to support you on that. She says, we can't enable high expectations, high rigor, and lots of love for all kids, especially our at-promise children.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. And that's the end of our webinar. She kind of summed everything up there. So, that's absolutely right. That's it. We've got to have that. We've got to have learning for all students, for all. High levels of learning for all. And again, we've got to fight the deficit model. And I know that's not the subject of today, but that's the soapbox I dragged into the room just for a second. We've got to provide high levels of learning for all. We've got to challenge staff and students to grow. That's academic press. Someone mentioned earlier PBIS, school-wide positive behavior plan. It just, there's nothing like consistency. There's nothing like consistency, and it's no different for kids. I'm a strong advocate for school-wide positive behavior management plans. Positive behavior plans. It just provides, consistency provides security. You think about us as adults in our work lives. There's nothing worse than inconsistency. It's one of the things we complain about most. You get one reaction one day and one from another. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. What school-wide positive behavior plans do is that it provides safety, security, and consistency for kids. It provides it for adults as well. Reinforces positive behaviors, reinforces responsibility, and gives us opportunity for authentic celebration. And so Rosa and everybody else just hit the nail on the head today, and hopefully some of these reminders will help. Here's a tipping point. When I work with collaborative teams and schools that are arranged for effective collaboration, the tipping point is this. When we can fight, I know that everything at most schools, most data reports and accountability has one teacher's name at the top of the ledger and the list of kids for whom they are responsible. And, while we know that no one teacher can hold all the keys to students' learning, that we have to have a collaborative environment, our systems are such that they undermine us by encouraging and supporting isolation, by making this group of students that teacher's responsibility. So the tipping point is this: we've got to fight that paradigm and work to see every child as my child, and the failure of any one of them is not an option. Right? That's one way to move toward academic press, is to declare that every child is my child, and the failure of any one of them is not an option. And in that way, we're able to build on each other's strengths and bolster each other's weaknesses, and we can keep kids right at the center. And so you think about that. Every child is my child, and failure of any one of them is not an option. You think about these words, again, looking at that North Star, asking ourselves, what is it that we stand on? What's most important? When I get a room of great educators together, even great educators, highly dedicated, educated, highly trained, if we don't get clear on an agreed set of cultural beliefs, you're going to have competing priorities. So looking at the physical side of things, and I'm going to start to wrap up here and take a few questions. Thinking about the physical safety of school, is your plan about more posters or practice? Do we have staff investment, staff trained, students taught? And students have to be taught in a PBIS model or any other model that is systemic. Students have to be taught, you have to teach it like a math lesson. You can't expect them to get it the first time. Are we checking in with our school-wide positive behavior discipline plans and asking, is it working and how do we know? Are we checking in to figure out, is it working? Do we monitor data? Is it results-oriented? And are we sharing data with staff? It's really important. And as important, are we sharing it with students? That's one of the disservices we often do, and I did this as well, is in my early years in leadership, I shared data with staff, but we never shared it with students and sharing it with parents. One of the things I did early on in trying to curb behaviors is that we all took ownership of data. And so one of the things we did was, this is just a quick example of we wanted to reduce the number of office referrals. So we took a twofold approach. We just didn't go after saying, hey, we're going to reduce office referrals, because there's a reason why office referrals will come into the office. One of the things we ensured was that teachers had support in their classroom in terms of training on classroom management. Because when we decided to take a hard, honest, and reflective look at ourselves as staff, we realized that there's some staff members who were more skilled with classroom management than others, and we had to face that. So we had to put some training opportunities and resources in place so that people were reasonably equipped to deal with issues in the classroom. And then we got students involved as well and looked at the number of discipline referrals and why. And I would take a piece of data like this and I would post it at water fountains for students to see. And after a while, it almost became competitive when students got involved as to reducing the number of office referrals over time. Now, admittedly, when I started doing this, some of my staff members weren't as crazy about it, but I really tried to stay true with my intentions, which was to get the entire community involved. Admin, staff, and students, especially students. I wanted to make them aware of what we were doing and why, what strategies they can use, and how they can access our program. And it just became a point of pride when they would, I could see students at the water fountain kind of discussing the data and really working for better results. I'm curious to know if anyone out there also involves students in working on better results in terms of student behavior. Would love to get a little bit of feedback on that. And water fountain data is not the only way, of course, but starting out, that's one of the early strategies I used, and kids really got into it after a while, and after a while, our staff got into it as well. The more important point here is to keep everyone aware of the data, what the data is and why it's happening, and then what supports we can provide to improve the data. Lastly, as we begin to wrap up, it's another thing that's important in terms of building physical and emotional security is to celebrate responsibly, and that is to make our celebration focused and meaningful. Now, there are places for all types of celebration. I'm not saying that celebrating someone getting engaged or someone caught a big fish over the weekend is not a point of celebration. But the celebration, the context of which I speak, is focused celebration, the kind of celebration that reinforces behaviors we want to see repeated. And so there are 4 keys to celebration as we look for opportunities to recognize behaviors of both staff and students alike. And that's to get really clear on the purpose of celebration. What are those behaviors we want to see repeated over and over? We want to make celebration everyone's responsibility. Celebration protocols often start with the school leader, the principal, but they shouldn't stay with the principal. The principal lights the match, but the rest of the staff fans the flames. And often a celebration committee will be formed looking for opportunities to celebrate. We can establish a clear link between the recognition and the behavior you're attempting to encourage. That's the purpose of celebration. It's not fluff. It's designed. There's a strange thing that happens with people when we celebrate and recognize things that people do in an authentic and genuine way. They are apt to do it again. They're apt to repeat the behavior. And so we want to make a clear link between what we're trying to celebrate, what behaviors we want to see repeated, and the celebration. And we want to create opportunities for many winners, give folks an opportunity and help to to change our culture,
We have some comments. Lisa writes, I have never thought of this before. I think it's an excellent idea. I will start sharing this data with students. Kim writes, we encourage students to set academic and behavioral goals, monitor those goals, and record the goals to share with parents once a quarter. Rosa writes, we have to get better about our positive behavior system. We do not do enough as a school to share and highlight positive behavior. Kim writes, then those students who have met their goals within a specific range get to attend a celebration, pop party. And then finally, the pop is about popping up your points.
That's great. I mean, it just reinforces everything that we've talked about today. This idea that everyone can be involved in the process. We've got to move the paradigm of physical safety away from, discipline plans, whether it's, when they're systemized, they're often focused on punitive measures, and they're often focused on attempts to stop certain types of behavior as opposed to reinforcing and celebrating wanted behaviors. And so I know that if we focus more on the behaviors we want to see, it will move us towards celebrating that more as opposed to focusing on behaviors that we want to eliminate. And I'm telling you, getting students involved with the data it was a force. It was just a force. I mean, it just became a point of pride for students to see improvement. And it wasn't that I didn't set it up so much to create competition between grade levels. I wanted more to see, what do the results look like in February, this week in February versus the next week in February, to kind of compete against themselves and look for them, for them to get better. As I wrap up, the path to any of our compelling goals is never straight. It's never straight. It's always curvy. We go off, we come back on, we divert, we veer off. The key, though, is to have that target, to be really clear about what we're working toward. See, while this curve on the screen is not a straight linear line, that's okay, because the target is there and it's clear. And so, again, if we can get clear on our school's cultural beliefs about what we want for kids, what's our non-negotiable, what can you guarantee every parent as they walk through or die trying? What's that thing when they look into your eyes, they know that here, this is a non-negotiable, this is our school's North Star, this is the prism through which everything, and what do we actualize to make that happen? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share one of my first thank you for attending the webinar as we hang on for a few more questions.
Ken, this has been just a wonderful, activity that you've brought us through. I'd want to encourage folks that you might want to check out the book, Creating Physical and Emotional Security in Schools. I understand that has a lot more suggestions and ideas, right?
Yes, and also I wanted to share my contact information as well. My email there is at the bottom, unfoldthesoul@gmail.com, and my Twitter handle is @unfoldthesoul. I also do all sorts of professional development and would love for our paths to cross again. You can contact me by email or contact Solution Tree and NAESP, but really, really enjoyed working together.
Yeah, these have been just wonderful comments. We do have a question. Lisa writes,
Yes.
How do you avoid turning celebrations into extrinsic motivation?
We kept ourselves, when I talked about focused feedback, and I talked about it very briefly, that when we provided feedback, it was always through the lens of our cultural beliefs, what we believed about kids. And, we fall back on extrinsic celebration way too much, and we don't give enough credence to intrinsic celebration. And if celebration's about authenticity, genuineness, and it being targeted, if we can use celebration to identify the behavior, attach it to the goal, and can show kids how they're moving and progressing academically and social emotionally, that intrinsic reward is often enough. And that's a human yearning. It's more than just kids. In the years where I was a principal and assistant principal, we had all sorts of goofy celebrations, and some of them them had extrinsic rewards and others didn't. And I'll tell you, after years after being in the principalship, I still am in contact with many of my teachers. And you know what they share with me more than anything else? They'll share a personal handwritten note that I scratched out based on something that I saw. You know, this world of social media. I'm not huge into Facebook, but, you know, I keep in touch with lots of my students that I taught when they were 9 and 10 years old, and they're now 30. And they talk about those small comments, guided feedback, comments. Very few of them talk about prizes or candy or rewards, a lot of which I used when I was a teacher. But they talked about were those moments where that bit of encouragement put me over the top, or that feedback was so genuine that it put me over the top, or that advice you gave me. And so I think if you start out with the intention of making your celebration about intrinsic motivation, recognizing behaviors that you want to see repeated and keeping it there, and perhaps maybe sprinkling in, you know, extrinsic rewards, I think you'll be in good stead. Celebration, again, is all about reinforcing behaviors that you want to see repeated. That's what it's about. It makes people feel good in the process, but all you want to do is you want to recognize those behaviors that you want to see repeated. So there'll be times where some of the celebration is private, but a lot of it has to be public. It's got to be public, where if I'm not being recognized that day, I'm going to look to the person next to me who is being recognized and say, you know, I want some of that. I want that. So what is that person doing that they were recognized today? So keep it authentic and keep it aligned with your deeply held cultural beliefs, your school's North Star.
That's wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much for a wonderful hour presentation. We are so delighted with our partnership with Solution Tree on this. I think you bring a lot to the table. Rosa writes, thank you, Ken. I purchased a few copies of your book for my school. Tammy writes, excellent point. So glad I attended. Thank you, Ken and NAESP. Again, if you'd like to purchase the book, you can do it through the NAESP website under our bookstore. We do have that featured this month. Otherwise, please feel free to go to Solution Tree. If you have any other questions or concerns, we will go ahead and end this webinar. Please stay tuned for the upcoming Solution Tree webinars. We'll have one each month. And we thank you again, Ken, and I'll sign off.
Thank you.